Hey, good afternoon as well. Good morning. Yeah, how are you doing? We are moving towards COP27, and as we move in progressive, we're going to have conversation turns around the climate, right? Conversation turns around what is the world going to do, what is Africa's going to do, and usually we know that discussions are very heated, and I know based on previous conversation that we had last not last week, previous episode that we had, that what the continent of Africa is going to bring into the conference, it's a pro-growth agenda, right? And which is definitely what needs to be done. But as we're doing it, it's also important for us to ask ourselves what could potentially derail this growth so that we make sure that the plan that we're bringing forward is actually as strong as possible and is credible. And that's what I want to do. That's why today I want to talk about the four hazards that I could see, that I could identify, the four physical hazards that could actually threaten this growth agenda and make sure that we can address it. Right? Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just introduce myself again. My name is Tony Tiu. I'm the founder here of Renewable in Africa, your global clean energy champion. What is that we do? It's very simple. Our job is to make sure that we demystify the renewable energy sector for you. Meaning that if you are an investor and you say you want to invest into the sector, but you're missing some crucial piece of information, what we do in here is to make sure that you get this information so you are able to invest your money safely. That's what it's all about. Or if you're saying, for example, you are a company and you want to dive into the sector, but you know that it could be very risky. You want to know what the safest way to do that, but what are also the opportunities, and have just a different angle of things that you are saying. We're gonna give you this perspective. If you're watching all the videos that we've done in the past, I promise you, you're gonna find at least a couple of videos that are of interest for you. Or maybe if you're saying that I am a professional, I want to get into the sector, but I want to know obviously. So, what are the tricks or tips and hints that I could get for me to embark into the sector? We're gonna give you all the information that you need, right? And what I'm asking you to do is just three things. Very simple. The first thing is just to subscribe to all our platform, because today, like previous times, we actually broadcasting for 5 platforms, right? So we definitely have LinkedIn, we definitely have YouTube, we definitely have Facebook, we definitely have Twitter, and we definitely have Telegram, meaning that there's more than one place where you can connect with us. So you see, there's no reason for you not to connect. Just pick up which one is your favorite one and just subscribe. Ideally, I like to subscribe to all of them, because it may come up that maybe on a Sunday you have access to one but not the other. You can still follow us. And if you're YouTube in particular, I just want you to subscribe. And after you subscribe, you also press the bell notification so that when there is a new video, you get aware of it and you do not miss it. And you can actually follow us live and ask your question, right? That's what I want to do. For example, I know there's somebody definitely watching us on YouTube. I can see that here on my little virtual studio, right? That's great. The second thing that I want you to do for us is to leave a comment. Tell us what you think. Tell us whether you like the agenda. Tell us whether there's something that you want us to discuss. I know there have already been people that came forward, suggested some topic. I can promise you, I have not ignored you. We're definitely working on that, because what we want to do is just make sure that every time we come forward, we give you information that makes sense for you. So we're going to be looking at that and with the information that are useful for you, right? And the third piece of information that I want you to do is to subscribe and share the video. If you're watching me right now, please, that's at least the least I can ask you, right? Just share this information. And I'm sure there'll be somebody that would appreciate receiving it, right? So that's what I like for you to do for us. Excellent. Now, I want to move into the topic of today, and just to set up a little bit of context. So we know that COP27 is coming. You know, it's going to be in Egypt. It's going to be in Africa. A lot of people are excited about that. Some are calling that the Africa Cup. Yeah, I'm not sure everybody would agree with that, but for me, usually I don't get bogged down into terminology. What is more important for me? What's in it? What is the content? What are we concretely and tangibly going to deliver? That's what is important for me. You know, terminology, I don't mind. Put it that way. So now, as we're moving towards it, so we also know that what seems to be transpiring is that obviously the African continent going to be bringing a pro-growth agenda, right? Meaning that we're going to be most likely insisting on having the opportunity to still exploit some of the natural resources that we have, right? So especially talking about gas, right? But hopefully as well, we will talk about renewables. So clearly we want to bring a pro-growth agenda. But as we doing it, for me, it's important, so especially if you consider ourselves responsible, to look at what could potentially derail this growth agenda. I know there's multiple factors, right? But I wanted to bring forward a set of hazards that for me need to be looked at very, very carefully. Because I know most of the time we like to state the fact that the African continent only have 3% contribution, right? If you're looking at the global emissions from obviously all the different players, all the different nations, and the whole of the African continent is only 3%. In fact, this figure of 3% actually vary, right? Some would say 3%, other 4%. I even saw from a recent reports that it was 10%. 10% maybe a little bit too much, but at the moment, I don't know. But let's say definitely it's still relatively small compared to many the other continent. But when we see that, so we may be sometimes tempted to say, okay, in that case, uh, as Africa, so we may not have that much effort to do compared to the other, right? So that's kind of justify a little bit, but it doesn't mean that we don't have effort to do at all, right? So because what is also important to talk about, which is why I wanted to discuss it today, is the fact that why the contribution per se it's 3%, the actual impact that we're seeing is quite significant and one that we need to pay attention to, right? Because I've said that in the past, and please, if I'm making a mistake, stand corrected. I'd be more than happy to have people correcting me. So, but from the information that I've been able to gather, you will see a country like France, I mentioned again in the past, that why they only have 1% contribution overall, right? They still seeing significant impact, right? Coming from the climate change. And the idea is for us, how can we manage those challenges? Do we have enough money to absorb those damages and make sure that we can nullify them, right? That is what I want us to do. But even talking about that, those damages, what it could be, it's important as well to know which one are we talking about. This way we can even better prepare, right? So this is the point of today's conversation. So I wanted to talk to you about the 4 top hazards that I have identified based on the research that we have been doing and based on some excellent reports that I've seen out there, especially one done by McKinsey, right? So there are 4 hazards that one can think about. And the first one, which is easy to guess, it's heat stress, right? So the heat, as the planet is warming up, clearly the average temperature is rising, right? And in the case of Africa, what it means is we may have above 600 million people that could be exposed, right, to more and more days where you have such a high level of heat and humidity. And this you want to know about, especially in West Africa. So this most likely going to be more and more of a problem. So this is something that we need to be paying attention to. So that's the first top hazard that I could see, and clearly we need to pay attention to that. So the second one that I could say it's agricultural drought, right? Because you have about 175 million people, right, in agricultural region that will experience a huge amount of drought compared to what we have right now. By the way, everything I'm speaking to you right now, this is maybe not yet what is properly experienced right now. However, this is kind of the projections that people that have done, let's say, a thorough research have came up with, right? Saying that if we were to keep on track with the path we're onto right now, and we hit the 2-degree average temperature increase, by 2050, as we tend to be on course to, right? So this is most likely what we are going to see. So that means that the second hazard, as I mentioned, the agricultural drought, right? And we're gonna have just not. It's not to say that we don't have it right now. We just gonna have more of those, right? And according to research, it's been said that between 7 to 8, serious drought per decade. Yeah, and that's not insignificant. That will make it much more harder to smallholder farmer, right, to maintain a livelihood in agriculture that needs to be rain fed, right? And agriculture is one of the sectors that employ a lot of people. I think, if I'm not correct, it's probably like something like 60% of people in the continent are actually employed by the agricultural sector. So if you can imagine then having 7 to 8 droughts, serious drought per decade, that's significant. So the figure was talking about 175 million that could potentially be affected by that. Yeah, and that is the second hazard that's identified after the heat, right? The extreme heat. That's going to be very difficult, making it difficult for people to work the normal office hour that they're working right now, right? And we could see that, for example, in Europe, when it was so hot, all of a sudden, people were asked to stay home, to work from home, and not to travel, and that brought in some kind of disruption. So imagine those kind of disruption, but having like more and more of those. That clearly is not something that is in favor of growth, right? And this is one thing that I want us to realize. Then Kenny wrote the third aspect is flooding, right? Flooding is another one of those. So, and you have about 130 million of people that could be exposed to severe coastal flooding that will be caused by the rising sea level, right? And intense rainfall, right? That can make sure that they could essentially breach existing defense that prevents that from happening. And flooding, you know, I'm sure everybody, all of us will remember the episode of Mozambique. The country is still recovering up until now. And you want to be properly costing what is the impact, what is the economic impact of such event, and how are they actually sort of constraining the growth in these in those economies. Very important for us to realize. That's what I'm saying. Yes, it is good to talk about a pro-growth agenda, but we also need to make sure that we understand well what kind of risk can derail that, and assessing them, what is the level of, what is the likelihood of those events from happening, and when they happen, what is the gravity, so that we can plan accordingly. So if you're just looking for a growth agenda that is not able to provide enough resources to contain, to mitigate, right, to reduce the impact of those hazards, then we may well having some growth, but we barely feel it, because it clearly is going to be not as high as we need it to be for us to tackle those challenges. So that's what thing, like I say, it has to be talked about properly. And I don't know for you, and again, I may be making a mistake, but this is not something I'm hearing much more often, right? So that's important. So after the heat stress, after the agricultural drought, after the flooding, so one want to talk about the water stress, right? Both on the rural and urban level. On the urban level, for example, you're talking about more than 20 million people living in urban areas that could experience water stress. I know, for example, the city of Cape Town experienced that a few years ago, and I was there, where they were kind of threatened by day zero, where they couldn't get any water at all. So, and that has a lot of impact, right? If you're thinking about, what you need water for, you need it for almost everything, right? So certainly, you need it for drinking, you need it for washing, you need it for industrial operation. You can imagine, such a situation, it could be even exacerbated when you have unplanned urbanization. So water stress is another one. So as you can see, the significant hazard that needs to be taken into account, that needs to be factored in the conversation, just to see that whatever we decide to go in for as an agenda, So how does it match with this kind of hazard I've mentioned, and how is it taken into account? Because if we don't do that, it's going to be a little bit tricky. Because I know the African economy overall, it's about a $2 trillion economy, right? And you probably know, or maybe do not know, when we had COVID, that was the first time for a long time, at least a decade, that the continent is going to recessions. I'm talking about the macro African economy, right? So if you take single economy, yes, but as a macro economy, that was the first time before long that we had a recession, right? And obviously now we're coming out of that, even if it's a bit tricky with the current situation. But if you think about the fact that even when we had growth, we were talking about something like 2%, 3%. So if you look at a 2% growth in a 2 trillion economy, what are you talking about here? You're talking about a 40 billion most like $40 billion margin that you have, right? So now what I'm simply saying here is you want to make sure that those 40 billion, it's enough to lift up the continent, right? To lift up the citizen while containing the impact, right, of those hazards that I mentioned. Because when we saw, for example, that in Pakistan not long ago, China that they had, the flooding. So somebody were costing that at $100 billion, right? So again, it's a figure. At the moment, I can't confirm it. I can't say that it's accurate. But let's imagine even if it's just only, let's say, a quarter of that, that would be 25 billion. Can you see it's already matching? And that was just one country. It's already matching what we could foresee as growth for the continent in the coming years, right? If you talk about 2%, right? So this is what I'm saying. If you have such event, affecting multiple countries in the continent, could you already see that you may be while you may be having some growth, this can actually just eat up your margin completely. So it has to be taken into account seriously. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So the economic impact, which I've started to talk about, we think that the rising temperature. In fact, let me share maybe a quick picture to look at as I was talking about the different region that needs to be that would be accepted, that would be impacted. So you can have a look a little bit. Okay, I believe you can see my screen, and I hope you can. So if you can't, so we discuss. So that's just a report that I've read, because usually when I bring to you some information, that's because we've been doing some research. We looked at some excellent report that I produced out there and trying to analyze them. We're not saying that all those reports are factually accurate, but it gives you a sense, right? So let's give them a benefit of a doubt. This might, okay, they've done serious job, serious job. That, for example, is a McKinsey report. So I would imagine they're doing accurate research, isn't it, right? Let's just accept that. They were saying that if you look at a scenario whereby we have 2% increase, right, by 250. So, and we're looking at the million of people that could be exposed, right? If you look at North Africa here, overall, we're talking about 160 million people that could be exposed, right? To those hazards that I mentioned to you. So you could see that the water stress here, almost 50% of this guy will be affected by water stress, significant. And that's not that surprising, because we know that North Africa do have a problem with water stress, obviously, right? Because it's a very dry, arid area. So, and if you don't have a proper desalination, water desalination plant that will provide the water, it's a bit tricky, right? So, and desalination, is expensive. So you can see after that you have issue with flooding, because with a lot of them they have many coasts, right? So as sea level are rising, so it can become it can present a challenge for them, right? So that's North Africa. Look at that, the heat, 32%, then 38% could face flooding, and almost 50% water stress. Very important to check. Look at West Africa, the heat. That's what I was talking about. That's most likely under a scenario whereby we have 2% increase by 2050. They have a major issue. Almost everybody, 93% of people, yeah, out of those 360 million people living in that part of the continent, 93% of them will be struggling with heat. That you want to know. And then drought, 70%, 17% and flooding 15%. Not negligible, right? Definitely not negligible, but that's significant. And then you have East Africa. So East Africa, 225 million people over there. So 73% also exposed by heat, 39% drought and 18% flooding. So this was obviously the impact and the effect won't be exactly the same in all of the continent because it's a huge place, Africa. We said a number of times already, right? So it will be discontinuous, right? It's not this exactly the same challenge that you need to be facing, but it gives you a sense. Again, like I say, even if those reports are not 100% accurate, I'd be surprised if all of a sudden they are completely wrong or false, right? There's probably something that you can adjust here and there, but as you can see already, it's quite significant, and this is not to be neglected. So, that's what I'm saying. When we talking about agenda, we want to make sure that this has been taken into account. By the way, I am not here advocating for a doom and gloom approach. No, this is not what I'm saying. I'm saying it has to be taken into account. Very important, because basically we usually say, governing it, anticipating, right? You don't want to be in a situation whereby you were warned about this thing, you did nothing against it, and after that you say, oh, who could have planned it, right? And the reason I'm saying that, right, because I was talking about the fact that the rising temperature, for example, right, you know that as the rising, it will make it difficult for people to work the same number of hours that they're working, because at times it may be unbearable. So if you think that I'm just making this up, just think about the Middle East, the kind of temperature they're having, and look at already the measure that they're putting in place to make sure that at a certain point in time, people are not advised to go outside but to stay indoor. They have as well a number of measures that are taking place. What I'm simply saying, the hotter it becomes, the more we need to be looking at doing something to contain that and allow people to see carry on doing the job, right? And you have as well increased drought. That clearly would impact the crop yield. And those are the things that you want to be doing. And the reason I was talking about that, right? So it's very important is because if you're looking at what we had for COVID-19, so when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So we've seen that clearly in developed countries, they rolled out stimulus packages, right? That was quite significant in order to make sure that they can assist their citizen and mitigate the impact of the COVID-19, right? So in the case, for example, for COVID-19, I think the stimulus packages that those developed countries rolled out, they were on, average size was about 30% of the GDP of African economies. Yeah, whereby for Africa, the few countries that actually rolled out some stimulus packages were just less than 5%. It wasn't enough compared to what those big countries can do. So that means if we know that we have not as much money as this guy to contain the effect of situation like COVID-19, we clearly as well need to know that most likely we may not have as much money as well that this guy to contain the effect of climate change, right? So that's why we can't be complacent. If I have less money, I need to be even more careful to make sure that I can make sure as well that I do something to prepare for it and to mitigate that, right? And to some extent, it's not possible to avoid completely, but do whatever I can. Some developed cities in developing countries, they will spend up to 35 times more per capita to protect their population against climate change that people would do for African cities. Cities like Nairobi, Kinshasa, Lagos, Addis Ababa. In 2014, for example, so New York, on average, they were spending something like $360, to protect each of the citizens per capita, to protect each resident. And that was compared to only $8 for Addis Ababa, right? Clearly, we're not talking about the same economies, right? New York, even New York economy is much larger than most African countries that I know, right? Still, it just gives you a sense to say that The thing with the challenges that with those hazards that I mentioned, those hazards basically are not discriminating whether you are a rich nation, you know, less rich nation, poor nation. It doesn't discriminate. You have to face, let's say, the same hazard, the same event. Now, you don't have the same economic capacity to tackle it. Yeah. And if you don't have it, you need to be clever. You need to be creative to see how you can still cope. Right. And that's probably the biggest point that I wanted to make here. The reason I was putting that across, because I've came to know that most African countries at the moment don't have adaptation plan in place, right? Well, I'm simply saying that if you know that you're going to be facing those issues, most likely than not, maybe it's your job to make sure that you have plans in place to make sure that you can cope with it. But at the moment, we don't have enough country with adaptation plan in place, right? In fact, less than 10 countries have actually submitted their national adaptation plan, you know, to the UNFCCC. So it means to me that as we're pushing a pro-growth agenda, it would be also responsible from our part to be looking at how can we obviously mitigate the effect of those hazards. And this is what I wanted to raise, let's say, as a point today for us to look at that. Yeah. It's not about having a doom and gloom agenda. It's about being aware of what's coming up to anticipate, to tap into that. Because as I said, as a business, for you to, if you know that, you're also preparing consequences, right? Even at your level. For example, if you're a place where you're going to have some water stress, as a business, how do you have a ready contingency plan? Because industrial operation needs a lot of water. If I happen, for example, being in Morocco and Egypt, how do I put a contingency plan to make sure that, you know, when we come across this kind of event, I can still carry on. It won't stop me, right? Same thing. If you need to invest as an investor, you probably want to be challenging the project you're investing into to ask them whether they've been thinking about that and in the event on one of those situations, because they're not okay. What we're simply saying here, those kind of events that used to be rare before is going to happen more and more. So that means it's a responsible approach for you to think about that and to plan ahead so that you're not surprised. So if you are an investor, you probably, and depending, because you've seen the different region I've shown you, you want to be asking yourself, okay, so how does he, how can it potentially affect the project where I'm investing into? Yeah, how would it be? Yeah, I'm showing that again. For example, if I'm investing into West Africa, let's say for example, I don't know, Burkina Faso. Why Burkina Faso? Because at the moment they're having a little bit of a tough time, so I want to give them a bit of love. So pick their country as an example. You know that heat's going to be most likely a big problem. You want to take that into account. You want to look at whenever I'm doing my risk analysis, you know, those due diligence, asking those people, what are we doing to contain it? Do we have a budget to mitigate it? If all of a sudden it becomes so hot, people can't walk outdoor, can it potentially delay the project that we'll be running? These are the kind of topic. If we know that there's going to be a 50% chance, a 50% people that may be struggling with flooding, are we potentially going to be in an area where we're going to have flooding? So you want to be looking at that, right? Same thing. I go, for example, to North Africa. I want to invest. I don't know. Pick a country. Let's say Tunisia. Okay. So how much are they affected by water stress, right? Is it a problem for for the project, not a project? You know, is it a project now, later? This is what I'm saying. By you, an investor, having this kind of knowledge, this is where all of a sudden you develop the intel, the insight necessary for you to question whether you're making the right investment or not, and even guide people you're working with to move towards, you know, a position whereby you are as prepared as possible and you can preserve your money, meaning that when you invest your money, you know that you thought about a number of situations and you've reduced significantly the amount of challenges that you're going to get, because not everything is only political risk. Oh, by the way, as well, those events that I mentioned, it could actually increase the likelihood of political risk, right? So this is what it's all about. Because I know, especially as a developer, which is what I am, we are as well. A lot of it is also about understanding what are the risks that you're facing and how do you mitigate them. So how do you tackle them? Very important. But for you to do that, you need to understand the environment where you're operating into. Because I usually say the technical challenge, that one could be solved in relative term easily compared to others. But those times I mentioned to you, you want to understand it. And that was the point of today's conversation. So let me leave that here. So I don't think there is any question that as far as I can see. So hopefully it means that I was clear enough. So if I wasn't clear enough, fire up with your question. I'll respond to that. Whether you ask a question now or whether you ask a question later when you watch it, just ask a question. We'll be more than happy to talk to you about that. So in between, like I say, don't forget to subscribe, to leave a comment, to share the video, please, and to suggest some topic that you want us to talk about. And if you have any questions, because for example, you are a business, you think you have a solution that you want to bring into the market in the continent, for example, outside, you like to raise awareness about that, definitely with the right people, make sure that you reach out to us and we'll be delighted to talk to you. So that's what I have to say today. I don't think there is a question as far as I could see, right? But I want to thank people watching us saying that, hey, we appreciate that. We're loving it. And then we're hoping that every day we're able to bring you all the information that you're looking for, right? Excellent. I don't see any more questions, so I believe that I have been hopefully clear enough, and people were able to get the information they're looking for. And I'm delighted to hear about that. And I have nothing else to say if it's not to say, guys, as usual, enjoy your Sunday. And as usual, may the sun be with you. Gapela, which means thank you in my language. Take care, guys. Later.